Most people, when they first start using a metal pen, encounter all sorts of problems, so let's have a look at these in order to avoid them. Here are a couple of nib holders. If I take this one, it's pretty straightforward. The nib fits into the side around this central circular thing. I don't know if you can see that. I'll put a clarification up on the video. So the nib will fit in here nice and snug. That's no problem on this type of holder. The other type of holder that sometimes is a problem for beginners is this one, which has a sort of spring. I don't know how close I can get for it to focus. Yes, there's a sort of spring in the middle. Now what I see very often in classes is people putting the nib in like this. See if we can focus, yes, in that bit. And then they wonder why it wobbles about. With this type of holder, you put the nib behind the spring, between the metal spring and the plastic cover. Can you see that? Behind the spring. So that makes it nice and solid. So that's the first thing to consider with getting a pen to work, putting it in the holder correctly. Okay. The nib I have in this holder is a Mitchell's round hand nib, and it's a new one. And if you buy a set of these nibs and you read what it says on the packet, it suggests that you dip them into boiling water before you use them. This is because the surface of the nib is covered with a very thin film of lacquer, which protects the nib and stops it from rusting, and you have to get rid of this this lacquer, and they suggest dipping it in boiling water, because if you don't, if you simply dip it into the ink will blob on it like rather like a spot of rain on a freshly waxed car. The ink will tend to repel the ink, so we need the nib will tend to repel the ink, so we need the ink to spread evenly over the surface of the nib, so we need to get rid of that lacquer. And you can either dip it into boiling water, or the way I learned is much more exciting. It's the use of a flame. So the first thing you need to do is to open your bottle of ink. And then take a lighter and just hold the nib in the light, in the flame, just for a couple of seconds like this, and then immediately plunge it into the ink or into some water or anything to cool it down. This tempers the steel properly, and you'll notice now that the ink, if I can get close, it's focusing on the ink pot. The ink has spread beautifully over the surface of that nib. So the important thing is to hold it in the flame and for a couple of seconds, and then straight into the ink. It should go psst like that. If it doesn't go psst, then you're in trouble. Do it again. It'll probably be okay if you do it a second time. So that's how to prime a nib, a Mitchell's nib anyway. Okay, this little thing is a reservoir, and it fits onto the back of the nib in order to facilitate more ink. So I'm putting it, it's very fiddly, I'm putting it on the back of the nib, on the underside of the nib, like this, and I want to adjust it so that it's about 1 millimeter away from the end of the pen. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, I think that's alright. About 1 millimeter away from the pen. This will help to retain the ink if you want to use it. Some people don't bother with them, sometimes I don't bother with them, but that's a reservoir. Just while I have it in mind, it's a good idea to keep your pen nibs clean, and the best thing to use is a toothbrush to rub them with, and just do this in clean water. Don't use any form of detergent at all, because if you get the slightest trace of detergent on the nib, it will affect the ink quite dramatically, and you'll probably find you've got ink spreading into the paper. So a toothbrush is the answer. See you in the next video.